I want to buy a copy of Bone Storm. Here's 99 cents.
Allow me to summarize the proposed transaction. You wish to purchase Bone Storm for 99 cents. Net profit to me, negative $59. Oh, please take my $59. I don't want it. It's yours.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. This is the final video of my interview with Comicron's John Jackson Miller. We had a great discussion. It started out, it was supposed to be centering on 90s comic book sales and kind of the truth behind those and how that market was affected and some of the factors in that. That video went up on Sunday. It was well received. It seemed like a lot of people really enjoyed that. But I had tons of extra audio, and I didn't want it to go to waste. So on Tuesday, I released a video basically where we talked about market factors and how you can kind of predict future comic book sales and some of the factors that need to come in if you want to actually inject life into the market and get it bigger. And that video went very well as well. And this is the final part of the conversation that we recorded, several days ago. It was really interesting. Definitely needed to put this one out. We basically talk about what the comic book market is going to look like post COVID-19, some of the factors that are going to play into it, some of the unknowns that we have, and some of the lessons that we can learn from past markets when they have been affected, whether it be by natural disasters or maybe by economic collapses and things of that nature. Of course, those aren't apples to apples comparisons, but those are the events that are similar that have impacted the market, and we know how things turn out after that. So we try to look at those events and see how they can predict what the market's going to look like moving forward. That is about half of the conversation. That is the first half of the conversation in this video. And then the last half, there was also some really interesting stuff where we talked about, he calls them paleo variants, really obscure variant covers, and how those came onto the market, whether or not they're really rare and kind of how you can assess value on stuff like that. I hope you'll stick around for that part as well. But the most important part is definitely the first 6 minutes, 7 minutes of that interview where we talk about COVID-19 and the impacts on the interview. I hope you enjoy this. This is the final video. And let me know if you want me to try and bring John Jackson Miller on in the future. And if you do, what do you want us to talk about? Is there something specific that happened in the market as far as predicting or past events? Whatever it is, let me know in the comment section, and I'll see if I can get him back on the channel and we can do this again, because I had a great time and we definitely have a lot more stuff to talk about in the future.
Now, I've been busier than I've been in a while with Comicron, in part because, well, I don't have a novel that I'm on deadline with right now, so that's easier. My new Star Trek book called Die Standing comes out July 14th, just to get that plug in, Star Trek novel. To a degree, I feel like we're in a period right now where nobody knows what the future holds. This is something that has never happened before, but maybe we can pull some things, from the past that might be useful. And regardless, we need to use the resources that we've got as archivists to save the history of what's happening right now, because this is not going to be the last virus. This is not going to be the last natural disaster. There's going to be an electromagnetic pulse. There's going to be a comet strike. There's going to be something. I'm a science fiction author. I can come up with a lot of things. The raging hordes of frogs. I can come up with a lot of ways that a system could be shut down. Whatever happens in all of this, whether it's to the comics industry or the movie theater industry or baseball or the airlines, whatever happens, people are going to come out of this, you would hope, with if not a plan, at least an example of what they did in the past to try to get things shut down and then started back up. This was the problem with us. And I've used this metaphor 5 or 6 times now on podcasts and on the website. And as a space person, you'll dig this, which is, as we see in Apollo 13, they shut down systems that were not designed to be shut down in flight. And they had to figure out how in the heck do you start them back up in order on a limited diet of amperage. My son's the electronics engineering major, so he gets on me if I say volts or something like that, or if I use the wrong term, but watts, amps, whatever. There has not been in case of emergency, break glass way to wind down the whole market. And I think what we've seen is where the music stopped was different at different times in different parts of this country and in the whole world. And there are pools of money that are owed to other people that are in different places than the people who need the money to pay their debts to other people. And it's just going to take a while to unwind this. It's almost, it didn't impact comics that much, but it's almost like in a business sense, in 2008, when you had the Lehman Brothers collapse and you had the stock market crisis with the real estate crisis, it took them a while. It took them a year or more to unwind some of these complicated, financial instruments that money was trapped in or that bad debt was trapped in, and get things back to normal. And it took quite a few years to actually come back from that. A financial recession is a lot harder to come back from than one that's caused just by a momentary lack of demand or a natural disaster. Now, that might actually be the hopeful thing for us, is that, as mentioned, before this happened, the market was in pretty good shape relative to previous years and previous winters, and I have seen some much worse winters and much worse years. It may not be what everybody thinks is successful in their own scheme of things. We had seen worse before, and it was, for the retailers, looking fairly good as we started the year. And so the hope would be because we didn't cause this problem, and obviously we're not going to be the ones to fix this problem on our own, that if there's enough capital back in the business, and the customers have the money, hopefully this might be something where it will start up faster, and we just don't know yet. And so what we don't want to do is another 7-year problem like we had in the 90s, and that was just so rough. I kept getting hammered by the publishers reading our magazines, saying I was being too negative or too pessimistic. I even tried to look. I remember in 1998, I did a column where I looked at it and said, is the market finally turning around? Because here's the slight glimmer of hope, and here's the slight glimmer of hope. But no, we had 2-3 years more to go. So we've seen it much worse. We've seen it where very large numbers of store closures. This is a situation where we have stores that are closed temporarily, and we just have to see, who's opening and when, and who comes back and what's on the shelves. Today, it's a different market, particularly when you've got CGC in there, and CGC has now been around for 20 years. When that market developed, and that's something else that came from sports cards, although it came from coins before it came from sports cards, the idea of slabbing. I covered that weekly in the magazine for about the first 2-3 years to develop an index of what the multiples people were paying just to have it in that slab. And with that kind of stuff, you can kind of look at it and say, well, that is rare. I mean, it is really the best copy. It is really there's a population report. It says how many copies there are. When we did the standard catalog of comic books, which is, I guess over here on my behind me, these giant books that we did, which were both price guides. They also had my sales figures. Well, we also put in the CGC population report. So you would be able to see this particular comic book had 150,000 copies come out in the beginning, and 1,500 copies of it have been graded. And the best copy of it is in 9.8. So again, that kind of changed the dynamic. But this is something that the collectors today do, retroactively deciding that certain things are collectible when they were not, just because it's slightly more rare. Newsstand versions of comics or direct market versions of comics, in the price guides, we always treated them as the same. We always were like, who cares? It's the same. No, there's no difference. But now people are going back and they're saying, well, there are a lot fewer of...
Yeah, Chuck Krasinski, I think he has like a special little market in Mile High for those comics.
He does. And, I'm not entirely, I've got a lot of the internal numbers from Marvel and some other places that say what the real number of those copies were relative to each other. And I'm not entirely sure that a lot of that really is as rare as people think it is. But at the same time, I did another Comics Buyer's Guide column where I called these things paleo variants. These are variants from back before they were intended to be variants. And there are a lot of them. I mean, and some of them were already worth quite a lot, even before we got to the Wizard era, even before we got to eBay or anything like that. Star Wars #1, the most valuable copies of that are the 35-cent price variants. Marvel did short print runs of Star Wars #1 that sold only in, I think, St. Louis and Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so we're talking about very small numbers. And you can look at it.
The variant cover ever was completely regional. If you're on the West Coast, you had access to to one version of the cover. On the East Coast, it was another version. There's a lot of that. I mean, the big boy restaurant comics. Yeah. East Coast and West Coast. Oh yeah, I did a lot of the first work in collecting on those, because we did not know for years how many of the variants there were, with the West Coast and East Coast being different. And I think we finally found out it was 148 issues of the run that they did 2 versions of, where they were actually having to not just do different covers, but they were drawing a different head for Big Boy in the interior of the issues. But yeah, that's a paleo variant. It's a bizarre one, but I mean, there's lots of them. The ones that are worth more legitimately from back in the day. The Marvel comics in the late 60s or early 70s had inserts from a jewelry company, where just some of the issues had this, this mail order catalog for Mark Jewelry inserted in them. Was the name of the Mark Jewelry was the name of the company. It's odd, but it is rarer than the other stuff. There are some people that specialize in that. There are people that specialize in error comics, the same way that there's error stamps or error trading cards, where what was printed was wrong. There's comic books where the inside of it is upside down relative to the cover, or they've got two or three covers on a comic book is common, because the machine just got stuck. Comics where the pages with a DC cover on a Marvel comic.
I've got that. Yeah, there's I guess there's I don't have that one. The one that I've got is Dennis the Menace. Marvel was publishing Dennis at one time, and so they had these little digests. What they had to do when they were doing a book that was both for the newsstand and the comic shops, and this is where we get our variants from, they had to make sure that the UPC code for the grocery stores was knocked out for the comic shops, because they didn't want the comic shops to send their non-returnable copies back to a returnable distributor and get the money for them. And so that's why we had these different covers. And so what was happening is they had to replace the UPC code with Spider-Man's head at the printer. And at the printer, somebody made a mistake, and they picked up the clip art for DC, your best value in comics. And so we have a Marvel comic with a DC logo on it. I don't know that that's worth particularly a lot. I wish it was, because it's the first one of those. And I do have it. What hurts it is it's Dennis the Menace and nobody cares.
Yeah. So, John, this is going to kind of wrap us up today. I really enjoyed the talk Hopefully you can come back on the channel. We can talk some more sales again. I'm hoping to bring Perch in next time, and we can really nerd out on some of these like sales and these weird oddities and stuff. That
I'm delighted to talk about the old stuff. As an archivist, most of what I'm working on is in the past. I drop it all to come back and do next month, or not next month, but this month.
You're setting up the next generation of comic
well,
book
yeah.
archivists.
My real interest is in the older stuff. That's the fun stuff. That's where the discoveries are.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.